I'm excited about this to be able to talk to Astronaut Abby about her new book. I've had the opportunity to take a look at it, and certainly has a lot more words than my new book. So it's good for the more serious people out there that want to maybe fly in space someday or do some other incredible things. I do not know Abby. I've never met her before. I was familiar with who she is, and from her social media and public presence. And so, in me doing a little research, I was able to learn a few things about her. And one of the things was that I saw some pictures of her in her flight suit, and the only patch I could see on it was the patch of my brother from STS 134. And none of her mission patches had anything to do with me or any of my flights. So I'm wondering what's going on there. Like, why my brother and not me? That's my first question.
Well, I think that it's a lot like how parents say that they're not supposed to pick a favorite child, but they do. Space fans aren't supposed to pick a favorite astronaut, but we do. No, I'm just kidding. That's not. So the reason I always try and be really intentional with the patches that I put on my flight suit, and they express experiences that I've had, because I haven't gone to space yet. Unlike Scott, I'm not a real astronaut yet. I instead have my patches be representative of experiences that I've had and things that I've done on my journey towards space. So, for example, prominently placed is the Mars Generation patch for the nonprofit that I founded. And the reason that I had the STS 134 patch on my flight suit was because when I was 13 years old, I got the opportunity to go down to Florida to actually watch STS 134 launch. And it was a really big part, it was a really big moment for me, and a really integral moment as well, because I was just this gangly 13-year-old kid who was really passionate about space and who wanted to be an astronaut. And that was my first real experience with the space industry. And that was my first foray into meeting all of these people in the space industry and really starting to understand things and having any real exposure to it. And it was also what ended up kicking off a lot of the work that I've done in science communication and all of those areas since then, was that experience at STS 134. So that launch holds a special place in my heart. But I guarantee that if you wanted to send me a patch from one of your missions, now that I have an event to connect it to, I'd be happy to put it on my flight suit.
Well, I
That's
was
my plug
only
for the evening.
well that's great. I was just really joking. I didn't expect you to have a real answer, but that's a great answer. I was actually there too at that launch that day. Both times. The second, I guess I
It
scrubbed
got scrubbed, yeah.
once. Yeah, so I was there. That was an exciting time. I was there with my sister-in-law, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, and it's great to see my brother launch into space for the last time. So clearly, that mission, STS-134, was not your first interest in space flight, right? Because otherwise, you probably wouldn't have been there to begin with. So how did you get? Where did this whole idea come from of becoming an astronaut and going to Mars someday?
Yeah, so I have always been passionate about space. It's one of my earliest memories is of when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, standing outside in my backyard and looking up at the night sky. And this wasn't any special night sky that I was looking at. I lived in the middle of a city in Minneapolis, so the skies were like kind of meh. But to a 4 or 5 year old, when I was standing out there and I was looking up, and I just had all these big thoughts going through my brain about wanting to know more about what was out there. And that interest and passion in space really got nurtured as well over the years, I think, or over those early formative years, by an interest in science fiction as well. And a lot of my relatives growing up were big science fiction nerds. And so I grew up watching and reading a lot of these fictionalized versions of what space travel could look like in the future, and it kept me really interested and engaged. And so from that very early age, I decided that I wanted to be a part of space exploration. And when I first made that decision in my brain, I was so young that I didn't quite know that the way to do that was to be an astronaut. So instead I said that I wanted to be an astronavigator, and I wanted to travel between stars and pilot rocket ships. And as I grew up, I realized that that position doesn't really exist yet, and that I would have to settle for being an astronaut, which isn't it's not a statement that I think you hear very often, is, I guess it's my second choice, but I'll take it. But for me, it was something that, like I said, from that really early age, I was really interested in. And as I got older and learned more about the realities rather than the fiction of space exploration, I realized that Mars was the next big frontier, and that it was the next step that for space exploration we needed to take in order to continue to advance and to expand our capabilities. And as someone who's always been an explorer and is really fascinated by space because of the ability that it has to open doors and unlock secrets and discover new things, I was immediately drawn to that idea of wanting to do the most, I guess, the most up-to-date thing, of wanting to explore and push the boundaries, and decided that going to Mars would be my life goal, I suppose.
So it seems like you're off to a really good start. I mean, graduating from Wellesley, and having your, I don't know if it's your first job after college, but working as a researcher at Harvard Medical School, that seems like a really good start. But what are the other things you've done, before college and even now, the kind of skills that, we might look for in astronauts that you are working on or have, worked on in the past?
Yeah, so apart from my education, which I do always like to highlight that, as you know, education is the absolute most important part towards becoming an astronaut. In addition to that, I also have a pilot's license, and I'm currently working on my instrument rating. I am an advanced scuba diver and have experience with skydiving as well. I've studied Mandarin, Chinese, and Russian and Spanish in school to hopefully be able to facilitate and be involved in international collaboration and space exploration. I have spent time doing research field work in Siberia, and also working at a Mars-focused astrobiology lab. And in addition to all of that, I've also, as has been mentioned a little bit earlier, I founded a nonprofit, and I've worked as a science communicator, volunteered as a science communicator for actually the last decade now. And it's kind of crazy to think about the fact that I've been doing that for 10 years. And at this point, I have about 1 million followers on social media. And the reason that I do put that out there as a piece that I think will be helpful in me becoming an astronaut is because I've always looked at the role of astronauts as twofold. One is the actual job of going to space and exploring and all of that. And the second part is the way that you interact with the community and the way that you inspire society and educate and engage and inform all of us here on Earth. And I want to make sure that if and when I become an astronaut, that I have the skills built up to be able to really effectively do that, and to step right into that role of being a science communicator. And so something that I look at as a proud achievement of mine is having had the opportunity to learn on and practice all of those skills over the years.
How old are you?
I'm 23 now.
Wow. That's a lot of stuff to get done towards your goal at 23. I think when I was 23, any kind of skill or experience or any kind of check in the block thing you would need to become an astronaut, I don't think I had any of those, like zero. I don't think I had graduated from college yet by then. So I think it seems like you're off to a really good start.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Let me ask you a little bit about your book, Dream Big. What inspired you to write the book, and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Dream Big is it's a mix of stories and activities and advice, and it's really intended to be a practical guide for anyone who has a dream that they want to follow. And I was inspired to write it because over the course of my life, where I've been chasing after my own big dream, which everyone knows by now because I say it all the time, is to become an astronaut and go to Mars. I have had a lot of incredible experiences. I've gotten to meet some really fantastic people and have learned from them and have gotten advice from people. And I've also learned some of the things the hard way. I've had my stumbles in life and I've figured out how to get back up from those. And I wanted to make sure that all of these opportunities that I'd had and these skills and tools and lessons that I'd learned from people, both within the space industry and in other areas, were not something that was just for me. I wanted to make sure that it was accessible and available to everyone else. And I think a big part of it, a big part of why I wanted to write Dream Big was because as I've grown up with this dream, like I said, there have been so many people that I've met who have been so incredibly gracious and considerate and have reached out a helping hand to me and have offered me their support and their belief and their guidance. And now I'm in a position where it was my turn to hopefully give back in that way a little bit by making sure that those lessons make it to a lot of other people as well.
So I took a look at your book, and a few of the chapters really stood out to me and spoke to me a little bit as things that I felt like were important in my life personally, and that was facing your fears, failure to launch, and bring everyone to the table. So I thought maybe you could just touch on maybe each of those and to explain to the audience, what you mean with all three of those.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm glad that you picked those chapters out because I love and I believe in everything that I wrote in the book, but I do have favorite portions and portions that were really important to me. And especially those three chapters especially are ones that actually are near and dear to my heart, of ones that when I was writing them, they were really personal to write because I have had a lot of fears in my life so far of having this big dream and being so, I guess, audacious in talking about it, and especially from a young age being just really outspoken about this dream. It's been incredible because it's allowed me to have so much support and to have all these opportunities I've talked about and talk to people and do all of this, but it's also opened me up to a lot of fears that I might not have had otherwise, or maybe I would have. Now that I've said this dream to so many people, what happens if I don't accomplish it, or things like that. And so I've had some of those big, I suppose you could say, existential fears. And I've also experienced other fears in my life that I've had to get over in order to pursue this dream of becoming an astronaut. When I was a kid, and this is going to sound a little bit ironic, but when I was a kid, I had an absolute deathly fear, of phobia of heights. And obviously that's not a great attribute for an astronaut. And so I ended up essentially, and I wouldn't recommend this to other people, but I essentially conditioned myself out of that fear. And now heights are one of my favorite things. And I love to fly, and I love to do anything that involves flying or free falling and all of that. And so that's why that chapter was so important for me to include, is because I think that for any dream that you chase after, whether it's a small personal dream or a really big, outlandish, loud dream like the one that I have, there are going to be these invisible fears like the ones I talked about what happens if I fail. And there will also be realistic fears, things that are standing in your way that might hold you back. And I think that the skills that I've learned in order to overcome those have been central to my ability to continue to chase after this dream. And I think that they're important for everyone to learn, because fear is something that as humans, that's one of the most basic human emotions that we all share. For failure to launch, it's a similar story for that chapter, where I realized that one of the things that I kept coming back to when I thought about my own journey towards becoming an astronaut was the times when things haven't gone the way I planned them to. And looking back at my own journey and my path, I've had definitely more failures to launch than I have had proper launches that go without any hiccups or anything. There have been many instances in my life where things have been different from what I'd planned or how I'd intended them to. And I think that I've realized that that's just, it's a part of life, and it's a part of having a dream, especially in chasing after it. And that if you don't have the skills and the people around you who teach you those skills to support you. For a failure, it can be the end point for a lot of people with their dreams. And that's really a terrifying notion to me, because it doesn't have to be. It can actually be an important step on your journey towards your dream. And for me, a lot of the failures that I've had have, in hindsight, I can, with the distance of a couple of years, I can look back on them and I can say that's probably the best thing that could have happened, because it taught me X, or I learned Z, or such and such happened instead. But it's largely about mindset. And that's one of the things I wanted to pass along in this book, was that things that seem difficult at the time will seem a lot better in the future, especially if you have the tools and skills in order to take a bad situation and treat it in a good way. And I apologize because this is getting long, but obviously I'm very passionate about everything that I wrote in this book. So you struck a note with this question. It's just lucky that you didn't ask me to give a synopsis of every chapter, because we'd be here all night. Mm-hmm. But bringing everyone to the table is a chapter that it's the last chapter in the book before the conclusion. And to me, it was probably the most important chapter to write, because I think that if we're not doing our part to keep the door open after us once we've walked through it, then what is the point of dreaming big? And it was something that I wasn't willing to write a book that was only meant to help people achieve their dreams, without also passing on the message of, once you do, or once you're on the road to achieving your dream, how do you help other people do the same as well? And so to me, that chapter is probably my favorite chapter, because it helps with that giving back idea, and that sense of making sure that we are creating opportunities for other people around us as well.
So yeah, if we didn't ever fail, right, we're probably not having goals that are outrageous enough. And I always like to say that failure is an option. It's always an option. We hope we don't fail, but if we went through life and never had any failures, we're not setting the bar high enough for each other. Interestingly enough, when you're talking about fear and fear of heights, I had an astronaut classmate of mine who was a fighter pilot in the military, and he actually never got over his fear of heights. And I can remember the first time I was on the launch pad, and we're at the 195-foot level of the space shuttle, and he could not go near the railing and look down, but he had no problem getting in a rocket and launching. So, fear is something that, we all have to manage. I've done a lot of challenging things in my life, professionally, personally as well. And one of the hardest things I've ever done is write a book. And it was at times really, really tough, and I kind of describe it as a miserable experience. But it's one of those things that, sometimes when you do stuff that is hard, then the rewards are even more great. So what I'd like you to do is just share a little bit about how the writing process worked. How did you do this? How long did it take? When did you write? What were you thinking about? Those kind of things.
Yeah, so I agree with you that, and I have less life experience so far than you do, but even so, I would say that writing a book is definitely up there with the most difficult, and in some cases, the most grueling, but also rewarding things that I've done so far. For me, my writing process, it was stretched out over a couple months, and it involved a lot of long days of trying to get in the zone. And my writing process was that every day that I was planning to write, I would, I'd get up and I would pack a bag that had my computer and some papers and pens and a water bottle, all of that stuff. And I would go, I tried really hard not to write in my house at all because it wasn't conducive. I would go to a bookstore. And I would find a place in the bookstore to just hunker down for a period of time to write. And there were a couple of reasons that it was really important to me to have that kind of an environment. I know that a lot of writers like to have silence or solitude around them when they're writing. For me, I liked to have the hustle and the bustle of the bookstore. I liked to have all of these other people around. And I think part of that was that I was writing this book to put my ideas out there for other people. And so it was never a solitary experience for me. It was never something that was just me thinking about myself, all of that. And so it was really great for me to be around other people when I was writing. And another reason that bookstores were a big part of my writing process was because I could look around every time that, especially when I was having a really difficult time with a particular phrasing or paragraph or something, or an idea that I just couldn't seem to get to fit right. I could look up and look around, and I could be really inspired by all the other incredible authors around who had written the books that I was surrounded by. And I could think to myself, someday my book is going to be on one of those shelves. And kind of seeing the end goal, seeing what the future could be was helpful, especially in those moments, like I said, where it seemed like, you want to tear your hair out sometimes. And instead I was able to just look up and see what could be in the future if I stuck with it. And the third reason that was such a great place to write is because I'm one of those people who can't walk into a bookstore and not leave with a new book. And so over the period that I was writing my book, I ended up collecting a lot of new books that I'm still working through a list of trying to actually read, which is both a pro and a con of that style of writing or that location for writing. But it was a lot of fun. And I have many thanks to put out to various bookstores that I frequented during my writing time.
So what's your favorite book about space? And don't feel obligated to say mine. You don't even have to say you read it if you didn't, but what's your favorite?
Thanks for letting me off the hook there. I feel like this is just kind of a weak answer because it's probably expected by a lot of people, but I'm going to say it anyways, which is that my favorite book about space is The Martian. And it just melds my love of science fiction and fantasy with a little bit of realism, which is what makes it so great, in my opinion, is that reading it, I was able to actually sit there and imagine and think about, like, what could the future of space travel be like? And I was able to imagine myself, hopefully not quite in the main character's footsteps, but in something similar, but more fortunate than those. I don't want to get stranded on Mars, but I do want to walk on Mars someday. So that was a great book for someone like me to read.
Yeah, I haven't read The Martian. I watched the movie. I actually watched the movie on the International Space Station like a few days before it came out. And
that right there is a phrase that not many people can say, right?
I also watched Gravity on the space station, which is kind of like watching a movie of your house burning down, but while you're inside of it. So it's a little weird. But since you mentioned Mars, so you're the co-founder of the Mars Generation, and so Mars is clearly important to you. And I'm often asked about Mars and going to Mars and why I think Mars is important and why we should go to Mars. So I'm going to just ask you this question because I want some new material, and I'm going to write down your answers. So tell us why we need to travel to Mars.
I think so. There are a couple of reasons why we need to travel to Mars. I always try and distill it down to the three main reasons that I see, because if you let me, I could go all night talking about this topic. But the three main reasons that I see are the first one is technological gain. It is the fact that one of the main ways that we improve life here on Earth in space exploration is by pushing the boundaries, by putting ourselves in situations that seem impossible or that seem really difficult, and then challenging ourselves to make them possible, to figure out the solutions to those challenges. And that ends up helping us solve problems here on Earth, to make life better here on Earth, and to really improve and increase our skills technologically and otherwise. And so I think that if we want to continue to see those types of returns on investment from space exploration, we need to continue to push the boundary, and we need to continue to ask ourselves, how can we really say, is this possible, and make it so? And the way to do that is by looking at the next big step that we haven't done so far and then doing it. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that I truly think that going to Mars will be, like I said, that next step in space exploration itself that allows us to gain more independence in the way that we explore. It will be that intermediary point in space exploration where we're no longer in low Earth orbit. We are traveling somewhere where not only are we so far away that you can't get an immediate supply of something, or you can't get a rescue mission or something like it, if it needed to happen, which not that stuff happens very often, but if it did, you couldn't have something just sent to you. But even more importantly, the Earth independence that you gain from this is the ability to have Earth and have independence from Earth for information as well, because the time communication between Earth and Mars is so much larger than it is between Earth and Earth orbit, that it means that in order to succeed on a mission to Mars, our astronauts will have to actually be independent of Earth for periods of time. They'll have to be able to handle any problem that arises, make decisions, solve challenges real time. They won't be able to wait the 40 minutes for an expert on Earth to get back to them about solving an issue. They'll have to do it themselves. And I think that that will drastically change the way that we do space exploration, the things that we're capable of and the things that we think are possible. And it will open up all kinds of deeper space exploration to us if we're able to make that shift. And the third reason that I think that Mars is so important is because it's actually pretty simple. It's because it inspires people. It's because it rekindles in each and every one of us something that I think is innately human, which is exploration. And so going to somewhere like Mars, exploring that, is undeniably something that would be inspiring and exciting to so many people around Earth as a whole.
Those are very close to my answers, and
good to know I'm on the right track.
Yeah, you're on the right track. The other thing I always add on to the last thing you said, and that is, clearly human space flight is expensive, right? But there are a lot of good reasons to do it, important reasons like the reasons you mentioned. But if all those reasons were wrong, and I was wrong, you were wrong, the thing I always add is that the inspiration that NASA and human spaceflight provides for kids around the world, and in the United States certainly, but also around the world, and NASA as a brand really is worth every penny, because so many kids are inspired by space flight to study science, engineering, math, those type subjects, become scientists and engineers. Those fields that are so important to our future, to our economy, to national security, to who we are really. If it wasn't for science and engineering, we'd still be living in a cave. So I think that the inspirational aspect is worth every penny. So let me ask you this question: you're getting ready for your first space flight. You're a couple weeks out. You're not going to Mars, maybe you're just going to the space station, because Mars, I think, will take a special kind of person, special qualifications. I'm not saying that's not you. What I'm saying is you can bring one person with you, and they're not an astronaut. Anyone that's ever lived. Who do you bring with you?
Oh, that's such an easy question, though. I'd bring you.
No.
You've spent the
Besides
most
me.
time. Oh, okay.
You want to bring me. You don't want to bring me.
You've spent the most time in space, though. Can't imagine a better sidekick.
Yeah. No, but someone that's not an astronaut,
right.
Just
a real person,
real
if
person.
you will. I'm going to be a complete cheeseball here and say that I would bring my sister, my older sister, Maddie. And she's going to hate the fact that I called her Maddie on this, because I'm only allowed to call her Madeline, but every now and then I sneak one in there. The reason that I would bring her is because I already know that I can survive with her. I grew up for 18 years with her. So I'm certain that a couple weeks or a couple months in a spacecraft with her will be probably fine. And also because she is truly one of my heroes in life, in that she is the most passionate and dedicated person that I've ever met to other people. She's the person that when I think about how I can be a better person in my life, she's one of them who I look to and I say, well, I can model myself after her. And I think that when it comes to wanting to bring someone with you to space, to space, you want to bring someone who both you can trust them in all of their ethics and their morals and everything, and also who's going to then be able to inspire the rest of the world. And I think she's one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah, that's great. I mean, hopefully your sister's watching.
Yeah, hopefully.
But I have to admit, I would not take my brother.
Which is more of a reality. See, I can say that, and it's just a nice thing that I say for my sister that hopefully will earn me some brownie points in my family and everything. Yeah. But there's absolutely no chance that she will anything's possible, but based on her own words, she's already said, no, thank you. Space, not for me. You, on the other hand, if you were to say that, someone might take you up on it. Like, you and your brother are both astronauts, so that's more of a
We almost had the chance of being in space at the same time because STS-134 was supposed to launch while I was on the space station on my first long duration flight, and they just got delayed out of the time I was there. But I think if I could take one person, living or dead, it'd probably be like someone like Galileo, I think, someone who's, taught us so much about space, and just to see how their reaction to being in space would be, and looking at the Earth from space, and the stars, and the unique vantage point of that.
Yeah, that's especially fun to think about if it was someone from way back in history who was integral, Galileo, Kepler, one of those, who was integral to our understanding of space, but who probably didn't ever imagine humans actually traveling in space. I really like that answer.
Yeah. So we got about 9 more minutes, I think, of us talking, and then we're going to do audience Q&A. And let's go back to your book a little bit. So what do you want your readers to take away from reading your book?
I really want my readers, anyone who reads The Mars Generation, to take away the idea that, who reads Dream Big, to take away the idea that their dreams are possible, and that there is no dream out there that is too big. There is no time in your life that is the wrong time to start chasing after a dream. And that if you have the right skills and tools, and that if you're open to learning those skills and tools as you go as well, you can achieve your dreams. And that's part that I also would hope that everyone who reads my book takes away, is that I hope every single person who reads it takes away something different. That because everyone's dreams are different, everyone's path towards achieving them is different, everyone as a person is individual and different. And as such, you can't just write out one prescriptive path of how anyone will get things done or achieve their dreams. And so I'm really hopeful that Dream Big, right here, feel like a cheese ball pointing at my own book, but I'm really hopeful that in reading Dream Big, each and every reader will be able to read it and find something in there that speaks to them and that helps them, and that they can actually take to heart and then use in their lives. It might be that they find one thing, or it might be that the entire book is really good for someone. But that's my hope, is that there's enough of my own experiences and the tools that I've used in my life that everyone who reads it will hopefully find something for them as well.
There is the risk, though, if your book is, if it's too good, that you're going to create a lot of competition for the astronaut selection group that you will be a part of, and maybe a part of someday. So I hope you realize that.
That's actually the goal. That's the goal with Dream Big, and the goal with the Mars Generation, the nonprofit that I co-founded, is to create a generation of people who are growing up, who are able to challenge me, I think it'll make me a better person to have to, really fight for that spot. But that's mostly a joke. Even more so, I think that it's going to be so important for any of us to succeed in the future, that we're all supported, and that more young people have the opportunities and are inspired to chase after them, whether it's in spaceflight or somewhere else. So I would consider it a job well done if I lose out on my position to be an astronaut to someone who read my book. That would be the second best thing to actually making it as an astronaut, right?
Well, competition definitely motivates us and makes us better at things. The Apollo program proved that with, I think if it wasn't a competition with the Soviet Union, who knows when we would have actually walked on the moon. So yeah, competition is important to make us all better. Let me ask you this: I do a lot of public speaking, and there's different levels of people's interest and knowledge about space. Certainly, what's one like a kind of a fun fact on space flight that you wish that more people were aware of?
Let's see. So I'll answer that in two different ways. One of them is that there are so many cool facts about space that I could belt off. Like one of them that always got me, because I grew up in Minnesota, is that sometimes during certain times of the year at certain latitudes, the surface of Mars is actually warmer than it is in Minnesota or in many other parts of the world. And that was something that when I thought about it would just like blow my mind over that. And I'd be sitting there at the bus stop freezing and thinking, oh, I really wish I was on Mars right now because it might be warmer. But that's, I have so many favorite facts about space. That's one of them. I would also say that the more boring answer I suppose I could give for that is that one of the things I wish everyone knew about space is that space is so multifaceted and has so many opportunities for ways that you can be involved in space. Because a lot of times I hear people talk about, oh, well, I was interested in space, but I didn't want to become an astronaut, or I didn't want to be an astrophysicist or an aerospace engineer, or things like that. So I decided it wasn't the right path for me. When the reality of space exploration, as you know better than any of us, is that it takes thousands, tens and thousands of people for every mission to be successful. And those people aren't all astronauts. They're not even all scientists or engineers or mathematicians. They're also teachers and publicists and writers and communicators and all of these other kinds of people who make space exploration possible. And I think that it would be great if everyone who was watching and really everyone out there knew that there's a multitude of ways to be involved in space exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the honor of flying in space with Barbara Morgan, and it was it was a real privilege to get to fly in space with a teacher. Sometimes I get mostly guys, really all guys will come up and say, "Oh, I was going to be an astronaut, but I'm too tall," and I say, "No, you're actually too short." And they're like, "What?" Anyway, hey, so tell us what's next for you. What's right in front of you? What's the next thing, your next goal?
Yeah, so currently I'm working at Harvard Medical School in the Jackson Lab. Go Jackson Lab! Where I'm working on immunology. And that was a really important step for me to take because I think there's a lot in space that has to do both with how we conduct space travel and hopefully in the future conduct it, and also how we use space to improve life for people on Earth that has to do with medicine. And so for me to get this chance to really have an inside look into immunology at Harvard Med is a great step. And I'm super excited to be doing a year as a researcher there. After that, I'm hoping to go to graduate school to get a PhD. And those are my personal goals for the future of my career. But as Astronaut Abby, I'm going to continue to do a lot of science communication. And my team at the Mars Generation has recently been pitching a space and science education style show to networks. So you never know, in a couple of years or a couple of months, who knows, you might see me on Netflix or Discovery or somewhere like that. And that would be a really cool next step for science communication as well.
Well, that's great. Those are great goals. I'd be happy to come on.
For help, go to your Alexa app.
Somebody must have said something about Alexa.
Oh no, they're listening.
So yeah, but
isn't set up. For help, go to your Alexa app.
I'd be happy to be on your show someday, is what I was going to say before she interrupted me.
I'll have to start. Thank you. I'll have to start including that in the pitches. Is that I have a co-signing by Scott Kelly.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of out of time for our discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you. You have some interesting stories to tell, great answers. And so now I'd just like to turn this back over to Amy for some audience Q&A. And, obviously this is Astronaut Abby's event. So I think the questions should be, focused on her and her book, but I'd be happy to answer anything you have for me as well.
Great. Well, we have, this has been phenomenal so far, and you've clearly inspired some questions in our audience. And I wanted to start off with with the first question. This is from a young person who didn't include their name. I am in the 3rd grade. I want to be an astrophysicist when I grow up. I'm pretty sure I couldn't say astrophysicist when I was in the 3rd grade. Do you have any advice for me?
Is this for me or for Scott?
This is for you, Abby, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Advice
Sounds
for
good.
a 3rd grader who wants to be an astrophysicist.
Yeah, absolutely. So my advice for a 3rd grader who wants to become an astrophysicist is to really look for resources out there to learn more about astrophysics, because it is never too early to start going down that road towards what your dream is. And the first step in going down that road, at least for many people, is to learn more about it. And we are so lucky to live in a world right now where there are all kinds of resources out there. You can find incredible YouTube and TikTok and, you know, TV shows, all kinds of things like that by people like a friend of mine, Serafina Nance, just started a show about, she's an astrophysics student for her PhD right now, just started a show about constellations and astrophysics and all of that, and it's fantastic. There's all kinds of resources, there's incredible books, websites, all of that kinds of stuff. And so that would really be my biggest piece of advice right now, is to start learning more about it and to dive deep into that passion and see if it's where you want to go.
And learn long division, because that's pretty hard. Focus on that.
Commit to your math right now, because definitely the better base you get in long division right now at an early age, the easier everything will be, right?
I had the short division down pretty well, but the long division was much harder.
Abby, someone else wants to know if you attended space camp.
I did attend space camp. Yep, when I was a teenager, and I actually have a great story about that, which is that I really wanted to go to space camp when I was a teenager, and my family couldn't quite afford it. My mom was a single mom who was raising me and my sister. She was a high school teacher, and it was just a very expensive thing for us to be able to do. And I did end up getting to go. My first time that I went to space camp, I went with the help of a nonprofit in Minnesota, where I grew up, that helped families both to fund and to self-fundraise and whatnot to send their kids to space camp. And that's a part of what inspired my mom and I to found the Mars Generation, because I keep saying throughout this that I co-founded the Mars Generation, but the person I co-founded it with is my mom. And one of the things that inspired us was trying to give these opportunities and these experiences that I'd had in space to other kids, and to really use space as a way to excite young people in all areas. And one of the ways that we've done that is that now the Mars Generation has actually given away or awarded more than 45 full paid scholarships to students living at or below the national poverty line to go to space camp.
Wow.
And it's
the only thing more popular than space camp I've found is, space camp is just universally popular. Everyone always says it's the greatest thing. And I think the only thing I've found more popular than space camp is free money.
And there's both. Yeah, no, I mean, space camp was such a cool. Did you go to space camp, Scott?
No.
Oh, well, you can go as an adult.
I wouldn't have gotten in.
Well, that's the fun thing about space camp, is that everyone gets in. But they might.
Maybe someday.
Someday.
Also, Abby, you talked about studying all of these different languages. And someone is asking about communication. And I think this is partly a question for you too, Scott. Assuming that not everyone aboard the International Space Station speaks everyone else's language fluently, how do you plan to overcome that barrier of communication? Or do you need to be fluent in one or more of those languages to be an astronaut?
I think that it really depends. My view of the future of space exploration is that I hoped that there is international cooperation that is happening when I become an astronaut and have the opportunity to fly in space. And in those instances, I imagine, and I'll pass this on to Scott to answer, to correct me or to add on afterwards, is I imagine that it will be helpful if you have a base in a language that is spoken by multiple members of the crew. But if you don't, I think it's likely that if you still get chosen for that mission, NASA or whatever space agency the astronaut is a part of will make a very strong effort to help make sure that you have all the skills and resources that you need to communicate before you're sent to space. That sounds like something out of a bad horror movie, that you're stuck in space and you can't communicate with anyone because you all speak different languages. Maybe it's a comedy, not a horror. But like I said, I'll pass that on to Scott now to hear his answer.
So, in my experience, so I'm not fluent by any stretch of the imagination in Russian, and Misha Kornienko is not fluent in English. Now, having said that, there was always a Russian on board whose English was much better than Misha's. So if there was anything that was very nuanced, we could always communicate through that other person. So yeah, the more language skills you have, absolutely is better. Is it an absolute requirement? No, because we were able to function where neither Misha and I were fluent in at least one common language. And we were able to, we get along great. We're great friends, lifelong friends. We were able to function very well. But, ideally, you would be able to communicate fluently. And on the space station, the official language is English. Most of the stuff we do in English. On the Soyuz, it's Russian. We speak Russian on the Soyuz. But, yeah, language skills are very important to this job.
Abby, someone is asking, you talked about overcoming your fear of heights. And that is something that you can see that you can take control of. You know you have that fear and you can address it. But with something like a future mission to Mars, it may be hard to anticipate what you might be afraid of. And one of our audience members wants to know how you deal with that fear of the unknown in general.
That's a very good question, because it is something that, especially when it's something I've thought a lot about with this dream of mine to go to Mars, is that in traveling further than any human has ever gone before and doing something that's never been done, there will undoubtedly be things that happen that you can't expect, and things probably to be afraid of, to be honest. And the way that I've always dealt with that possibility of unknown fears and that likelihood of fears in relation to Mars is by making sure that the fears that I have now here on Earth, that I manage those. And the reason for that is because I think that skills like how to deal with fear are transferable. And they're also skills that need to be practiced. And so if you are ignoring your fears right now, and then you expect that when you get to Mars and something kind of funky happens that's a little bit scary, you'll just magically be able to deal with it, that's not the right way to look at it. Instead, you should say, or what I try and say to myself is, how can I manage my life right now to make sure that I'm building those skills and practicing those skills so that anything that happens down the road, I'm able to handle.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for all of us. This is a question I thought was particularly interesting, because I don't think this is something, I think if I was considering being an astronaut, my fear of heights would absolutely prohibit me from doing it. My fear of confined spaces, the list goes on. And these are things that are sort of obvious, but what sort of things, this question is about what sort of things might disqualify someone from becoming an astronaut, like allergies or dietary restrictions. Are those things that can be barriers to becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, so this is another one that I'll definitely start, and then I'll pass it along to Scott, because I think he can speak more to that. The way that I look at it is that there are definitely things right now that can prevent someone from becoming an astronaut. There are certain medical conditions, things like various kinds of heart issues or bone issues, those types of things that would just cause space to be a much more dangerous environment for someone to exist in. And so currently, that does restrict who is, I suppose, able to go to space or to become an astronaut. But I think it's important to add on to that while there are certain restrictions right now, those might not always be. I think that we are living in a day and age where people who are my age and who are growing up right now are able to look at space exploration as something that has changed so much already, and that is changing so fast, and that is growing in a lot of ways, that anyone who wants to should continue to dream big about space and about becoming an astronaut, regardless of what the realities of right now seem like, because by the time that they're actually able to or ready to go to space, we might have found solutions to some of those issues. We might have different requirements. We might have just a wider accessibility to space for all people. How about you, Scott? What's your take on this one?
Yeah. So, yeah, I have allergies. I'm allergic to pollen. I take, the seasonal allergy medicine. I took it in space. But certainly, there's certain levels of things and levels of allergies, that might potentially be disqualifying. As an example, if you had like a really severe, peanut or nut kind of allergy, I don't know, that might be disqualifying. Maybe not, but like Abby said, technology changes, things are always changing. I wouldn't, temper your dreams based on what kind of medical situation you're in right now, because things can always change. I flew in space with a guy that was at the Air Force Academy, and he wanted to be a fighter pilot and a test pilot and an astronaut. And he was told that he couldn't be a pilot because he had asthma. And he went through most of his young career in the Air Force, and then later he became a medical doctor and a NASA flight surgeon, and always thought that the asthma that he had would be, limiting for him and would prevent him from applying. And the other doctors said to him, "Well, are you really sure you have asthma? Like, maybe we should just check it out and see." And it turns out he really didn't have asthma anymore. Probably did, but he kind of grew out of it. Like some, so you just never know. And you never know what the requirements are, whether they're going to change, or, whether you have a condition now that might go away over time, or maybe there's something that would help you get past that. So dream big.
Thanks for the plug there.
I think we may have time for one more question, maybe two. Abby, this is for you. This audience member wants to know, what are your thoughts on SpaceX and their plans to go to Mars? Would you be willing to be a part of a SpaceX mission?
That's a consideration that I would have to make in the future based on the specifics of the mission. Until you have more details than what we currently have, I really can't say yes or no. So what I'll say is that I'm open to the idea, and that overall, I'm a big fan of the privatization that we're seeing of the space industry. I think that it's a really important step to be taking in space exploration to have that kind of privatization happening. Not only does it open space up potentially to more people in the future, but it also allows there to just be more going on in general, because you can only have so many focuses at one time. So NASA can either be focusing all of our efforts on low Earth orbit and or the moon, or we can be saying, what's the next big thing that we can be doing? And the more players that you have in space, the more things you have happening, the more potential collaborations you have. The way that public and private space exploration builds off of one another and works together in a lot of instances is really incredible. So for me personally, I don't know if a private or a public mission is in my future, but I would be open to either and both of them.
Great answer. If there was one thing that you wanted the most, the young person who has the most doubt in their heart about what they want to do with their life, whether it's being an astronaut or an engineer or anything, what would you say to that one kiddo that maybe doesn't have a lot of self-confidence? How can they sort of begin their journey to believing that they could do something like that?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you asked that question. It's a really important one to talk about. And for me, the answer has to be that it's okay. That kind of doubt is okay. And that even if you start working towards a dream now and it turns out that it was not the right dream for you, or that you decide you want to go down a different path, or it ends up for some reason not working out, the act of still chasing after it is important, and it will lead to other things in your life that are really incredible and really good. And I think that you can't go wrong by chasing after your dreams. So no matter what kind of self-doubt you're feeling about whether you're scared that it might not be the right thing in the long term, or you're scared that you might not be able to achieve it, the best thing to say to yourself is, so what? That doesn't matter. What's more important isn't whether or not you're going to achieve it, it's whether or not you try.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. This has been a wonderful hour. Scott, did you have anything else to add before we sign off?
I'm not an interviewer. I've interviewed a few people. I've interviewed Ryan Gosling. I've interviewed Claire Foy, who was in the Apollo 11 movie. Mark Armstrong, Neil's son. Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead, and now Astronaut Abby. And this was probably the most enjoyable interview for me. Good luck to you, Astronaut Abby. Good luck on your book. I hope people read it. I didn't read the whole thing, but I read parts of it, and I think it's really good. And I think it will provide direction, inspiration, and a path, as you say, rocket fuel for your dreams. So good luck.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate your kind words, and I also appreciate you joining us tonight, Malaprops and myself and everyone watching. I know that I really enjoyed getting to know you more and hear more about you and your experiences and your story and your time and space. And I really appreciate your kind words. And I'll be in touch in a couple months about getting you a spot on my TV show. We'll see if we can fit you in, okay?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for hosting,
Bye-bye.
Amy.
Bye-bye.
And thank
Good
you
night.
to Malaprops as well again.
It was our
And
pleasure.
to everyone who's watching. Good night.